What's going on, guys? We're going to talk about adjusting course, what we should do with dynasty teams that are off to an unexpected start. Maybe you have a contending team. I put contending in quotes here that is underperforming. You know, you're 1-3, you're 0-4, or you have a tanking team where you thought this probably isn't my year. No, I'm gonna sit back, relax, and just collect my Caleb Williams share at the end of the season. And all of a sudden, you've won a couple of games. What do we do in those situations? It can be overwhelming. It can be a little bit scary because you had a plan and it's not really working. So let's start with the contending teams that are underperforming, because that can actually be a little bit more of a disastrous situation, because maybe you have some older assets, maybe a disproportionate amount of your roster value is stored in players that are going to lose value at the end of the season. You might feel a little bit desperate. You're like, this is my window and it's closing shut faster than I expected. Um, the first thing I would suggest is go on your platform and see if there's a max points for recorded anywhere. It can be also be called potential points. I know Sleeper has it. I think MFL has it. And this is just, if you set your optimal lineup every week, what would your total points be? And see how that stacks up against the rest of your league. Because sometimes you just get unlucky with start sits. You have the wrong guys in your lineup and your team's actually doing fine. It's just you haven't played the right guys in the right weeks. And I think in those cases, you don't have to panic too much. But you want to see yourself in that, top 5 or 6 at least. Because if your potential points is much lower than that, you might not be the contender that you thought you were. What's your first thought with this type of a question, Chris?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. You have to look at your points for and see whether the record is fraudulent or not. But if you do go look and your points for or potential points for is 7 or lower, you're 1-3, 0-4. I mean, in my opinion, you have to start to lean into the tank. At this point in the season, 4 weeks in, we should know what our team is at this point. And if you're coming back with bad points for and a bad record, you're probably not going to make the playoffs. And if you're not going to make the playoffs, you do not want to be stuck at pick 7 or pick 8 in a rookie draft. You want to be pick 1. You want to be pick 2. And basically what I would be doing is I'm waiting. I'm not doing anything yet, just because the longer in the season, the more injuries that happen to other people's veterans, the more valuable your veterans will become. So if you can hold off for, a couple more weeks and start to target those teams that are trying to make that push for the 5th, 6th seed that may have lost a player or two, you can, look at a guy, or maybe look at a guy that lost Nick Chubb or, something like that, where you can take advantage of his need and get, injured players that aren't helping him or rookies that aren't helping him, something like that, that will help you give yourself the best chance to win next season.
I actually disagree with you a little bit here. Just on the time frame, I think this is actually a pretty desperate situation. I think you need to start right away. It's going to depend on the league and depend on your team, but I've seen the more dedication to tanking this year than over the past couple of seasons because of Caleb Williams. And
That's a great point.
You might need to start right now if you're actually going to have a chance to contend for the first overall pick. If you're 0-4 and you're at the bottom, you need to push the eject button no matter what. I don't care if you think your team is stacked and you've just gotten really unlucky with matchups or whatever. It doesn't matter, because the odds, even if you do have a great team, the odds that you're going to be able to turn it around and get up into that 6th seed at minimum, a lot needs to go your way. Like if you're 0-4 and you're like,
you
I have a
basically
lot of
need
really good
7 wins.
Yeah, I mean,
that succeed.
if you're like, I've gone against all the best teams in the league, I have a really soft schedule coming up. I'm playing like 3 tanking teams in a row, and I have JT and I have Cup on injured reserve, and I'm going to be back. Okay, maybe you can try. But if I have any 0-4 teams, like I'm done. I'm just like, I'll see you guys next year. I'm packing it up. And I'm sending out offers immediately, because you're right in a sense that there is more leverage when other teams need veterans. However, there's 2 things. Number one, if your league is paying attention, they're going to see that you're just as desperate as they are to get the points off of your roster. And they might not be as willing to help you out with that if they see like, hey, we have a mutual need here. It's not like you're doing me a favor. Like, you need to get rid of this guy just as much as I need to add this guy. And the longer you wait, I think you can actually get yourself out of some better value deals. The other thing is, right now, there's probably still 8 or 9 teams in your league that do want to win. If you wait a few weeks, that might be 6. It might be 5. Like teams dip out if they don't think they're going to make the playoffs. Even if they are going to make the playoffs and they think they don't have a shot because there's a couple of front running teams. I've seen teams go into the 6th seed that like have already sold a bunch of their players for picks. And they're like, it's not my year. So the longer you wait, the less potential trade partners you might have. So
No,
what I'd be
those all make a lot of sense. Those are good points. I agree with that.
Yeah, so if I'm in that spot and I'm like I'm 0-4, I'm 1-3, I'm ready to eject. I'm going really aggressively to all the managers in my league that I think could be interested in the players that I have, and I'm trying to get their first round picks. That's my first goal. I want their first round picks. If they don't want to trade their pick, I want their 25 first. That's a thing you can do sometimes where teams are kind of, especially teams that aren't sure yet whether they're legit for this year. They might be willing to buy a competing piece and trade their 25-1 because they're like, well, I'm holding on to my flexibility for this year. And who cares about next year? It's so far away. But those can end up being the teams that just kind of collapse in on themselves. And then you end up with a really early pick the next year. So I would be going after first. But other than that, I mean, you go trade for like Kyler Murray. You go trade for some underperformers like Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson, guys like that, young players that are in bad situations right now where you can see light at the end of the tunnel. Are there some other targets that I'm missing here?
Yeah, I think maybe like T. Higgins, Garrett Wilson, Kyler Murray, obviously, and then the Falcons, Drake London, Kyle
Yeah,
Pitts.
always Kyle Pitts. Just keep buying him. He'll never produce any points, but the lineup screenshots will look nice in April.
Yeah,
Um,
but I think the point here remains is that if we went into the season contending and we now find ourselves 1-3 and worse, we are not buying points. That is not
Yeah.
the correct thing to do. You cannot fix the ship. It's sinking. You got to let it sink. I think that's the biggest point here. We are not trying to
Yeah.
buy points to fix it.
The biggest mistake that I see happen in dynasty leagues is where you have that team where you've kind of gone all in. You have Devontae Adams and you have Christian McCaffrey, and somehow you're still losing games and you're 1-3, and you think, I need to do something right now because these players are going to lose value and I need to win the league. And you go ship off your first round pick for some other piece that you can play. And then you still don't make the playoffs and you've given up, a top 5 or 6 rookie pick for basically nothing. That's how you end up with a team that's in a hole for years. So you don't want to panic. You can still trade those veteran guys for legitimate returns right now, and that's what you should be trying to do. You can't. It sucks. Like if you think you were going to win your league and now all of a sudden you're tanking, but that's just the nature of dynasty. Sometimes you have to go with the flow, and if it's not your year, it's not your year. I have teams like that, but I also have other teams where it's the opposite. I have other teams where I thought I was going to be out of it. I thought that I was going to have to sell everything off. And then, you hit on a Puka Nacua, you hit on a Kyron Williams, you get some spot starts out of, Jerome Ford, and all of a sudden you're off to the races. It happens. So let's turn it over to the other side here. Tanking teams, your teams that you thought were out of the running that are overperforming. What are your thoughts there?
And again, I'm just going to say you got to lean into it. Even if we're coming in with let's say you got a bunch of rookie picks stocked up for future years, but if you come in and you find yourself 3-1, first of all, got to check points for, make sure it's a legitimate 3-1, and you're not beating bad teams. But if you are legitimate 3-1 team scoring a lot of points, I mean, I think it's a good time to try and take some of that excess future value and buy points this year and just solidify the rest of your roster. Because, if a lot of your value is in the future, but you're scoring points now, you can kind of balance that mix more towards the middle, get rid of some of the future value to get more points now.
Mm-hmm.
And then you honestly have a great chance to win this year. And then you're still maintaining yourself later. And that's how you build a good dynasty, by getting that balance in the middle.
Yeah, you don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, right? Like if you've come off to a full start, even if you didn't expect it, the last thing you want to do is say like, no, I'm still going to tank and I'm just going to compile value for the future, because like the reason we tank is so that we can eventually make the playoffs and win the championship. So if it already looks like that's happening, you don't want to just give that up. Like I was talking to a league mate this past week. I was trying to make a deal with him. I was actually trying to make a deal where I sold Herbert to him to get Stroud plus because I'm tanking. And I was like, cool. Well, I think Stroud's going to be, up around Herbert this time next year. I'll see if I can grab like a Puka Nakua, maybe a 25 first. If I can, if I can't, maybe something smaller. But he was like, I don't know. I'm still like, I'm really trying to sell off my pieces. Like, I'm not trying to win this year. And I'm looking at him like, okay, you're 3-0. This was before week 4. Like, you're 3-0 right now. There are 4 other teams in this league that are tanking that you like literally have no chance of catching. Like, you're not going to get ahead of them in the rookie draft. So you're
Right.
going to pass up on a 3-0 start to get what, the 5th overall pick in the rookie draft? Is that slight bump in EV worth giving up a playoff run? It's not, because at the end of the day, like once you get into the playoffs, anything can happen. You can win a couple of weeks, you can get some money. And at the end of the day, we're trying to win money in these leagues. So you don't want to be like that. You don't want to be perpetually pushing things out into the future. When you have that opportunity, you hit on some late round guys. Don't be afraid to turn some of that future value into present value. Like you said, you can trade an extra first round pick away and grab a starter. You can try to upgrade into veterans. You can try to trade an up and coming player for an established veteran. I made a deal that sold Kyle Pitts away on a team where I'm doing better than I thought. I paid a little bit of extra to turn Kyle Pitts into Mark Andrews. And it was probably a slight market loss. Like I probably overpaid a little bit, but it's worth it for me if I can get into the playoffs and now I have Mark Andrews, who's, a top 3 tight end in points per game, and I don't have to play Kyle Pitts. That's worth it because that could yield me some actual tangible winnings this season.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of this league that I had where the startup was before 2020, and I tanked the startup with the goal of competing in 2022. And the 2021 draft was just super nice to me. I had, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Trevor Lawrence. I had a bunch of players that I was starting. I started off the season 2-0, like 3rd in points for in the league. And I leaned into it and I sold, some 22 picks and, other rookies for points. And I ended up winning the championship that year. So it's just like you said, if it comes to you and you're 3-0, you should just lean into that. It's hard to be 3-0. Teams compete and they plan to compete and they don't even go 3-0. Like it's just, if it comes to you, take it.
Yeah, exactly. And I would even say, even if it's a little bit fraudulent, even if you're 3-1, but you're 7th in points for, I think that's okay, because once you're 3-1, you have a better than not chance of making the playoffs. So I would be willing to lean into that a little bit more than like on the other side of the coin that we talked about. It's really hard to get out of that 0-4 hole and get into the playoffs. But you're kind of coasting at this point. If you're 3-1, I would be more willing, even if my team's slightly fraudulent, to try and buy those points, because you can turn 7th in points for into 4th or 5th, and then all of a sudden you have a legitimate chance. You just, as long as you have a good amount of roster value, it's okay to turn some of that into current year production. Like, roster value is not the only thing that matters. It's a combination of 2 things. It's production and value. And so you want to be above average in your league in value as much as you can be, but you don't have to be like 1st in value if it means you have to be 12th in production. Like, you can be 4th in value if that means that you get to, in this current year, jump up and be 4th or 5th in production as well. And that way you can compete this year and still have a window for the next year, rather than being all in or all out.
Yeah, and I kind of glossed over this earlier, but a 7-win mark. So basically, there was a chart going around on Twitter. It was your like percent chance to make the playoffs based on the number of wins you had, and it was like 6 wins, you have a 40% chance to make the playoffs in any given league, and then 7 wins, you have like a 70% chance. So it's a huge jump there. And then obviously 8 wins was like 85%. It just continues to go up. But if you can reach 7 wins, you have a good chance to make the playoffs in your league. And if you start 3-1, you only need 4 more wins at that point. You have basically 10 weeks to get 4 wins, and then you're going to be a playoff team. So it's just, you just got to take what you're given.
If you can go 500 the rest of the year, you're almost a lock.
Right.
So that's what you want to keep in mind when you make those decisions. The other thing to keep in mind is, if you're 3-1, I can almost guarantee you are not getting Caleb Williams at this point. Like, it just isn't going to happen. There's there is a team in your league, whether they did it on purpose or not, that absolutely sucks, that has won no games, and they are not going to be winning 3 games this year. And if it's on max points for whatever, either way, they're not going to be beating you. And you're not going to score fewer points than them. I will say it's easier to make up that ground if it's on max points, because some teams don't really tank all the way, and they'll keep like Garrett Wilson and they'll keep Trevor Lawrence on their team. If you really, really want to tank, then you get every player off your team. And like I have a league where I literally have Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson and no one else. Like I'm starting
And Devon A. Chain.
nothing. I'm literally, yeah. Well, now I have Devon A. Chain because I was forced to promote him off my taxi squad via a very obscure rule. Anyway, I'm literally starting Zach Pascal and Josiah DeGuara and like literal nobodies that are going to score 0 points, because I'm trying to get to the bottom and I'm trying to get Caleb Williams, and that's what it takes. I might have to sell one of my quarterbacks. Like we'll see. I'm not opposed to it. I might do it because the difference between the 101 and the 102 this year is going to be substantial. Caleb Williams is probably going to come into the league as like a top 8 startup pick. So it's just something to be cognizant of. What are your actual ranges of outcomes in terms of rookie picks? And is your team overperforming so much that you can genuinely see a path to winning this year? Because if so, just change your plans. Go for it. It's winning games is fun. I promise you.
Yeah, I actually have a league too where it's a start 2 wide receiver league, and I roster 2 wide receivers on my team, and that's it. And it's Drake London and Demarcus Robinson. That's all I got.
Yeah.
And I will be the 1.01 next year. Like there's no doubt.
Sometimes that's all it takes. I had to trade. I have a league I'm tanking right now where I promise you there are leagues I'm not tanking. I'm just in a lot of leagues. So there are a few that I'm tanking. And I have Nico Collins and I have Jake Ferguson, and they keep scoring too many points for me. It's keeping me from getting down to the bottom of the standings. So today I shipped off Nico and Ferguson for a first and a third. The first could end up being like 106, 107, could end up being like 19, 110. We'll see. I thought that was pretty neutral in terms of value, but it's huge for me because I'm scoring fewer points, and that gives me a better chance of getting that higher pick. That's the sort of part of the trade that you can't see, but it's still there. It's still tangible, and it does matter. So don't even be afraid to take a slight market loss if you really need to get players off your roster. If you're tanking effectively, you're going to make up for that lost roster value by having a higher draft pick.
Yeah, you got to have a goal and you have to work to achieve it, and there's value in that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll close out this segment with just a couple of other trade conversations. I had a couple of ideas for tanking teams, some trades they could try to make. I mentioned tearing down into CJ Stroud plus. Still think that's a great move if you can do it. I would also be trying to get somebody like T. Higgins or Drake London, these wide receivers that they do hold value, but their value is suppressed right now because they're not really scoring a lot of points, but we know they're good players. I would be taking, Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, guys that are scoring points right now. You don't want those guys on your team because they're older, they're scoring points. You need the opposite of that. Try to turn them into T. Higgins, Drake London. Maybe you can even get a plus on top. That's a really good way to kind of reset your aging curve, score fewer points, and have some guys you can hopefully use next year if you're coming out of that tank. Do you have any other ideas that we could suggest for the people?
Basically, you want to get rid of all your starting running backs if you're going to push to a tank. You want handcuff running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks. You want to buy your running backs when you're ready. So, like, even though you can go try to buy younger running backs like Brian Robinson or, something like that, you don't actually want that because Brian Robinson's going to score you points. And by the time you're ready to score points, Brian Robinson might not be able to help you. So while, yes, they're young players, you don't want to target them because of the position they play.
Yeah, please don't buy Brian Robinson if you're tanking. I don't even think I would buy Brian Robinson if I was competing, to be honest with you. But don't fall into the trap of trying to buy young players. The first thing you want to get is picks. The second thing you want to get would be rookies. The last thing you really want to go out and try to get when you're tanking is young players that haven't broken out yet. You don't want to go and try to buy like George Pickens. You don't want to go buy Jordan Love. You don't want to go and buy these guys because number one, they can score points. You don't want that. Number two, their value is pretty fragile because you're still kind of banking on something that hasn't happened yet. They can get hurt, they can underperform. Draft picks don't do that. They don't get hurt, they don't underperform, they don't lose value, they only gain it. So if you go and trade for these unproven players, you're not just turning old production into currency. You're turning an old player into more of like a wild card. Um, and I said that was reasonable to do with somebody like Quentin Johnston. Again, that's because he's a rookie. It doesn't take a lot for him, for his value to just shoot up. And he does have a little bit of flexibility because he's a rookie. But I would not be trying to get into like second or third year players that haven't popped yet and trying to make that bet. It's just it doesn't always work out. So it can be pretty risky to do.
Yeah, and then you want to look at your actual league, and you want to find your competing teams and buy their players that aren't doing anything, and you want to go to the bottom of the leaderboards and buy their studs. So it's just really, you got to go to each team and figure out, if I was this team, what would I be looking to do?
Yeah.
And if you have that in your head, you're going to be way more successful in trades and finding trade partners that actually want to give you what you want to get. And that'll help a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where you want to go to those teams at the top, like you said, and see what they have that they don't need. And if they have a hole, right? Like if they can trade, if they have JSN and they're the number one seed, like maybe they're willing to part with him to upgrade another position. And you can like take a downgrade at quarterback and get JSN and they get, Trevor Lawrence. I don't know, something like that. Or you get their first round pick and JSN and you give them like Tyreek Hill or something like that.
Right.
And everybody wins, right? Everybody wins because they get to strengthen their team for this season. You get pieces that are going to be more valuable by the time, the season's over. And that's how you want to do it. Just keep wheeling and dealing.